The rain doesn't just fall in the green sector. It doesn't drop from the sky like it does back in the provinces of the high valleys, where it's a blessing for the wheat. Here, the rain is a physical weight. It is a suffocating gray curtain that smells of rotted iron and ancient fermenting mulch. It's been 40 years, or maybe it's been 40 minutes, since I sat in the mud of the tri-border delta, but the sound of water hitting a tin roof still makes my trigger finger twitch against my thumb. They called us the shadow hunters, but we were just boys with heavy packs and a deepening realization that we were trespassing in a place that wanted to swallow us whole. We didn't have a name for the country that we could use in polite company. We just called it the humid hell. I remember the weight of the Pattern 9 rifle. It was a cold black piece of stamped steel and composite plastic that weighed exactly 9.4 pounds when empty. With a full 30-round banana magazine and the strap cinched tight, it felt like a lead bar dragging my shoulder into the earth. I knew every scratch on that rifle. I knew the way the bolt made a specific hollow clack if you didn't oil the return spring just right. In the green sector, your gear was your only relative. You loved it, you hated it, and you spent more time cleaning it than you did sleeping. We were moving through a stretch of the low highlands they called the Spine. It was a ridge that looked like a jagged tooth covered in moss. My boots, the standard issue cord saw strikers, had been wet for 3 weeks. My feet weren't skin and bone anymore. They were a pale, bloated landscape of trench rot, white and wrinkled, like something that lived at the bottom of a deep-sea trench. Every step was a gamble. You didn't just walk. You placed your weight with the delicacy of a tightrope walker. Like click of a pressure plate. Miller was in front of me. Miller was a farm boy from the Western Plains, a kid who used to talk about the way the wind sounded in the cornfields until the silence of the jungle took his voice away. He was our point man. His eyes were constantly vibrating, scanning the vines, the thick interwoven canopy that blocked out 90% of the sun. Even at noon, it was twilight down on the floor. "See that?" Miller whispered, not turning around. He didn't move his head, just shifted his eyes toward a cluster of broad-leafed ferns. I froze. Behind me, the rest of the squad, 6 of us in total, went down on one knee. We didn't need a hand signal. We were a single organism. I smelled the copper of my own sweat and the acrid tang of the insect repellent we slathered on our necks until our skin peeled. "What?" I breathed, the word barely leaving my lips. "The way the leaves are turned," Miller said. "Underside is up. Someone brushed through here an hour ago. Maybe less." The underside of the leaves in the green sector were a lighter silver-gray color. When someone moves through the brush in a hurry, they flip the leaves and it takes hours for them to settle back. It was a neon sign in the wilderness. Someone was ahead of us. The shadows. We didn't call the enemy by a name. We didn't know their politics, and we didn't care about their flags. They were just the shadows. They lived in the earth, in tunnels that smelled of smoke and sour vinegar. They didn't wear heavy boots, They wore tire treads, sandals cut from old rubber that left tracks so light they were nearly invisible. We stayed still for 20 minutes. In the jungle, 20 minutes is an eternity. You watch a beetle crawl over your knuckle. You feel a leech attach itself to your calf, its cold, slimy body swelling with your blood. But you don't move. You can't. If you move, the shadow sees the shimmer of your fatigues. The green tiger camo was supposed to hide us, but against the vibrant, living emerald of the spine, we looked like dark, bulky stains. The humidity was a physical hand pressed against my chest. I focused on my breathing. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. The combat box breath. It's the only way to keep your heart from hammering through your ribs and giving your position away. Finally, Miller gave the 2-finger twitch. Move out. We crested the ridge and began the descent into the gully of mists. This was where the air became soup. The fog didn't drift. It hung there thick and smelling of stagnant water and decaying orchids. My pack, the L-frame Mark II, was digging into the sores on my hips. I had 60 pounds of gear, 300 rounds of ammunition, 4 fragmentation eggs, 2 smoke canisters, a gallon of water in plastic bladders, and a week's worth of dehydrated K-blocks. The K-blocks were the worst. They tasted like salted cardboard. But you ate them because the calories were the only thing keeping your muscles from eating themselves. I remembered my father's letters from the Grand Border War, 30 years prior. He talked about mud and cold. I would have given my left soul for cold. Here, the heat was a predator. As we reached the bottom of the gully, the sound changed. The jungle is never quiet, but there are different kinds of noise. There's the live noise, birds, monkeys, the wind. Then there's the dead silence, when the animals stop because something larger is moving through. We hit a pocket of dead silence. Miller stopped dead. He raised his fist. We sank into the muck. I felt the water seep through my trousers, cold against my heat-rashed thighs. I looked to my left. Specs, our radio operator, was huddled over his long box 77. The antenna was wrapped in black tape to keep it from snagging on thorns. He was sweating so hard it looked like he was melting. Contact? I mouthed to him. Specs just shook his head, his eyes wide behind his salt-crusted glasses. He pointed toward the thicket 30 yards ahead. Then, the world ended. It started with a thump pop, the sound of a mortar tube. My brain, wired by months of this, didn't even wait for the explosion. I was already face down in the mud, my mouth open to equalize the pressure in my ears. The explosion was a white flash that turned the gray fog into a searing wall of fire. It wasn't like the movies. There was no slow motion. It was a violent, jagged tear in the fabric of reality. Dirt, shrapnel, and bits of prehistoric fern rained down on us. Ambush! Miller screamed. though the word was lost in the roar of automatic fire. The shadows opened up from the tree line. Their rifles had a higher pitch than ours, a sharp, rhythmic tock-tock-tock that sounded like a sewing machine from hell. I crawled toward a fallen log, my fingers digging into the rot. I felt the zip of rounds passing inches above my helmet. A bullet hitting a tree sounds like a whip crack. A bullet hitting a human body sounds like a wet slap. I heard that slap. I'm hit! I'm hit! It was Davis, the youngest of us. He was screaming, a high, thin sound that cut through the gunfire. I didn't think. You don't think in the X. You just function. I rolled over the log, leveled my pattern 9, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against my shoulder, the familiar vibration traveling through my teeth. I wasn't aiming at a person, I was aiming at the muzzle flips, the tiny sparks of orange in the gray. "Specs, get the birds in here," I yelled. Specs was on the radio, screaming coordinates into the handset. "Firefly 1-6, this is Nomad. We are pinned in the gully, grid 390, heavy fire. We need the rain." The rain meant the heavy support, but the birds were miles away and the fog was a wall. I looked over at Davis. He was clutching his thigh. The blood wasn't red in the dim light. It looked black, like oil. He was lucky. It had missed the artery, but he was in shock. His eyes were rolling back, showing the whites. "Miller, cover the left," I shouted. Miller was already there, his belt-fed 7 spitting long tracers into the brush. The tracers were red streaks that stayed on the retina, burning lines into the dark. We were holding them off, but we were trapped in the low ground. It was a textbook kill zone. The shadows knew it. They didn't charge. They just kept us pinned, waiting for the mortar to find our range again. Thump pop. "Move!" I roared. We dragged Davis by his harness, his heels digging ruts in the mud. The second mortar shell landed exactly where we had been 30 seconds before. The shockwave knocked me forward, my lungs burning as I inhaled the cordite and the smoke. I found myself behind a massive titan tree, its roots like the walls of a small fortress. I jammed a fresh magazine into my rifle, my hands shaking so hard I dropped the empty one. I didn't reach for it. If you lose a magazine in the mud, it belongs to the jungle now. "Where are they?" Miller panted, sliding in beside me. His face was smeared with black grease and blood from a branch cut. "Everywhere," I said. "They're in the trees, Miller. They're in the ground." The firing died down for a moment. That was the worst part. The lull. In the lull, you can hear your own heart. You can hear the blood rushing through your ears like a distant river. You can hear the enemy talking, a low, melodic murmuring just out of reach, like the sound of ghosts in a library. "They're flanking," Miller whispered. He was right. We could hear the brush snapping to our right. They were circling the titan tree. "Specs, where are those birds?" 5 minutes out," Specs yelled back. He was huddled over Davis, trying to tie a tourniquet with slippery fingers. "They can't see the smoke through the mist." "I'll give them something to see," I said. I reached for my bright ball, a magnesium flare designed for emergency signaling. It was a dangerous move. If I lit it, I'd be a lighthouse in a dark room. Every shadow within a mile would have my sights locked. "Don't do it, Sarge," Miller said. "We stay here, we die," I said. "Keep them off me." I stood up. Time slowed down. I felt the grit of the mud on my cheeks, the weight of the steel pot on my head, the dampness of my shirt. I pulled the pin on the flare and held it high. The world turned white. The magnesium burned with a fierce, terrifying intensity, hissing like 1,000 snakes. The fog turned into a glowing cloud. I felt like I was standing in the center of a sun. Immediately, the tree line erupted. Bullets tore into the Titan tree. One clipped my shoulder, a searing white-hot poker that spun me around. I didn't drop the flare. I couldn't. And then I heard it. The thrum. It was a low-frequency vibration that you feel in your marrow before you hear it with your ears. It was the sound of the dragonflies, the heavy transport gunships. They were coming over the ridge, their twin rotors churning the thick air into a frenzy. "Nomad, this is Firefly 1-6. We see your light. Hold tight, we're gonna sweep the yard." I fell back into the roots as the gunships arrived. They didn't use rifles. They used rotating cannons, 6-barreled monsters that fired 4,000 rounds a minute. The sound wasn't bang, bang, bang. It was a continuous guttural burp that sounded like the earth itself was being torn in half. The tree line where the shadows had been hiding simply disintegrated. Trees 3 feet thick were shredded into toothpicks. The mud turned into a fountain of spray. The air was filled with the smell of scorched wood and spent brass. It lasted for 60 seconds. Then, silence. The gunships hovered, their downdraft blowing the fog away for a brief moment, revealing the carnage. The jungle was no longer green. It was a shredded, smoking gray wasteland. "Clear," the radio crackled. "Nomad, we're dropping the basket. Get your wounded in." We worked in a fever. We loaded Davis into the steel cable basket, lowered from the belly of the lead dragonfly. He was white as a sheet, but still breathing. Specs went up with him. Then Miller. I was the last one on the ground. I stood there for a second, my shoulder screaming in pain, looking at the magnesium flare as it flickered and died in the mud. I looked at the tree line. There were no bodies. There never were. The shadows took their dead with them. All that was left was the shredded foliage and the deep, dark holes in the earth where they had lived. The cable pulled me up. As I rose above the canopy, I saw the green sector for what it was, an endless, undulating sea of emerald, stretching all the way to the horizon. It looked peaceful from up here. It looked beautiful. That was the lie. The hospital at Base Delta was a series of corrugated tin huts that baked in the afternoon sun. The smell of antiseptic couldn't mask the smell of the swamp that we brought in with us. I sat on a cot, my shoulder bandaged, watching the ceiling fan spin. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded like the rotors. Everything sounded like the rotors. Miller was in the cot next to me. He was staring at his hands. They were clean now. The nurses had scrubbed the mud off, but he couldn't stop shaking. "I can't feel the floor," he said. "It's just the meds, Miller," I told him. "No," he said, his voice a dry whisper. "I mean, back home. I don't think I'll ever feel the floor again. I think I'm still in the gully. I think I'm still waiting for that mortar." I didn't have an answer for him. I felt the same way. The war wasn't something you left behind. It was a skin you grew. You could wash the mud off, but the green was inside you now. We were sent back out 2 weeks later. Different ridge, different gully, same shadows. We became the old men, even though none of us were over 22. We learned the language of the jungle. We learned that the spider birds only chirped when the perimeter was clear. We learned that the smell of sweet grass meant a shadow camp was nearby, because they used the grass to weave their mats. We stopped talking about home. Home was a dream someone else was having. The only reality was the weight of the pack and the sight of the man in front of you. I remember a night on the Black Hill. We were in a listening post, 3 of us, sitting in a hole no bigger than a coffin, 300 yards outside the main perimeter. It was raining again, a soft, insistent drizzle. I was on the midnight watch. I had the night scope, a heavy primitive infrared device that turned the world into a grainy, ghostly green. I scanned the perimeter. Green, green, darker green. Then, a shape. It was a man. He was standing perfectly still, 30 yards away. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He was just a shadow among shadows. He wasn't holding a rifle. He was just looking. I looked at him through the scope. I could see the heat from his body, a faint, glowing aura. I put my finger on the trigger. I had his chest in my sights. He didn't move. He didn't look like an enemy. He looked like a man who was as tired as I was. He looked like he was lost in the same green ocean. I breathed. In for 4, hold for 4. I didn't fire. I don't know why. Maybe I was tired of the noise. Maybe I wanted to see if the world would keep turning if I didn't pull the trigger. He stood there for a long time. Then he simply melted back into the brush. He didn't make a sound. He was a ghost. When Miller woke up for his shift, he asked me if I'd seen anything. "Just shadows," I said. "Just the wind." The end of the war didn't come with a parade. It came with a standard directive on a piece of yellow paper. Cease operations. Withdraw to the coast. We walked out of the green for the last time. We left the hills, the gullies, and the titan trees. We left Davis in a cemetery that had no names, just numbers. We left Miller's voice somewhere in the spine. On the boat ride back to the mainland, I sat on the deck and watched the coast of the green sector disappear into the haze. I thought about the man in the night scope. I wondered if he was standing on the shore, watching me leave. I thought about the sights locked on shadow. People ask me now, when they see the way I look at the rain, what it was like. They want stories of heroes. They want the glorious charge. I tell them about the dirt. I tell them about the way your skin rots when you stay wet for a month. I tell them about the weight of the pattern 9. I tell them that the hardest part of the war wasn't the dying. It was the living. It was the way you had to become a shadow to survive the shadows. I live in a small house now, far from any jungle. I have a garden, but I don't grow ferns. I grow vegetables in straight, orderly rows. I keep the grass cut short. I like to be able to see the ground. But sometimes, when the humidity rises and the sky turns that heavy bruised gray, I find myself reaching for a rifle that isn't there. I find myself checking the undersides of the leaves in my garden, looking for the silver gray. I find myself scanning the tree line at the edge of my property, waiting for the flicker of a tire tread in the mud. The doctors call it residual stress. They give it a name like it's a fever you can break. But I know better. I'm still in the gully. I'm still behind the titan tree. I'm still waiting for the thump pop. The war didn't end, it just went silent. And in the silence, you realize that the shadow you were hunting was just your own reflection, lost in the green, waiting for a light that would never come. I look at my hands. They're old now, spotted with age and scarred by old thorns. But they're still shaking, not from fear, but from the memory of the weight. 9.4 pounds, empty. The rain starts to hit the roof, tink, tink, tink. I close my eyes. Nomad to firefly, I whisper to the empty room. We're still here. We're still waiting for the rain. But the sky is silent. The only thing that answers is the sound of the water, falling on a world that has forgotten the boys who became shadows. I remember the great marsh. It was a place where the water didn't move. It sat there, black and oily, reflecting nothing but the gray sky. We had to cross it to reach Point Echo. We waded in up to our chests. You had to hold your rifle above your head with both hands. It was an exhausting, soul-crushing crawl. Every few steps, your foot would sink into the silt, and you'd feel something brush against your leg. A log, a fish, or one of the water shadows. You never knew. You just kept moving. I remember looking back at my squad. We looked like a line of drowning ants. Specs was struggling with the radio. The water was an inch from the intake. "Keep it up, Specs," I urged. He didn't respond. He was just staring at the water. "It's thick," he said. "It's like walking through blood." "Don't think about it," I told him. "Just move." That was the secret. Don't think. Thinking was the enemy. If you thought, You realized how far you were from home. If you thought you realized that the people back in the provinces were eating dinner, watching the sunset, sleeping in dry beds. If you thought you died. We reached the other side of the marsh, but we weren't the same. We were covered in a black, stinking slime that wouldn't come off. It stained our skin. It stayed in our pores for years. Even now, sometimes I smell it. It's a swampy, metallic scent that triggers a cold sweat. We found a village near Point Echo. It was empty. The people of the Delta had fled, leaving behind only the husks of their huts and the cold ashes of their fires. We stayed there for the night. We slept in the dirt, our rifles tucked under our arms like lovers. I remember watching the moon rise over the thatched roofs. It was a pale, sickly thing. It didn't provide light. It just made the shadows deeper. I sat there, listening to the jungle breathe. It's a rhythmic sound, a pulse. The insects buzz in waves. The wind moans through the bamboo. It's the sound of a giant, sleeping beast. I realized then that we were never going to win. You can't win against a landscape. You can't defeat the mud. You can't kill the fog. We were just temporary irritants, like the leeches on our legs. Eventually the green would shake us off. And it did. It shook us off and left us scattered across a world that didn't speak our language anymore. I remember the last day at the Northern Hook. We were waiting for the big ships. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and salt. Miller came up to me. He looked older than my father. His eyes were sunk deep into his skull, surrounded by dark circles that would never fade. "We going home, Sarge?" he asked. "Yeah, Miller," I said. "We're going home." "What are we going to do there?" I looked at the horizon. I didn't have an answer. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe we'll just sit on the porch and watch the grass grow. But we won't go in it. We'll just watch it from the gravel." He nodded. "Yeah, the gravel. I like the sound of gravel." We stood there for a long time, listening to the waves. It was the first time in 2 years we weren't listening for the thump pop. It was the loudest silence I've ever heard. Now I sit in my chair, and the silence is still there. It's a heavy, expectant thing. It's the silence of the gully. It's the silence of the night scope. I look at the wall. I have a photo there. It's grainy, blurred. It's the squad standing in front of a dragonfly. We're all grinning, but the grin doesn't reach our eyes. Our eyes are somewhere else. They're locked on the shadows. They stay there, even when the lights are on, especially when the lights are on, because in the light you can see the shadows clearly, and you know that they're just waiting for the rain to start again. The narrative continues, delving into the procedural details of gear maintenance, the stripping of the pattern 9, the lubrication of the firing pin with graphite oil, the stitching of a torn boot with sinew thread. It explores the psychology of the bunker mentality, the way a soldier begins to feel safer in a hole than in a house. It describes the specific taste of the iodine tabs used to purify water, a bitter chemical flavor that made the swamp water drinkable but never pleasant. The pack is the primary burden. You learn to balance it. You put the heavy stuff in the middle, close to your spine, the radio batteries, the extra belts of ammo. You put the soft stuff, the spare socks, the poncho, at the bottom to cushion the frame. But no matter how you pack it, by mile 10, it feels like a person is sitting on your shoulders, pulling you backward. You learn the jungle lean. You walk with your torso tilted forward at a 45-degree angle. It shifts the weight, makes you look like a scavenger, a hunched creature prowling for scraps. It's the only way to survive the hills. The hills in the green sector aren't like the hills back home. They don't have paths. They're walls of vertical mud and tangled vines. You don't walk up them, you climb them. You grab onto roots that might be snakes. You dig your fingernails into the soil. And when you reach the top, you don't celebrate. You just look for the next one. I remember Hill 88. It wasn't really a hill. It was a tumor, a massive bloated mound of earth that overlooked the river of sorrows. We had to take it because the shadows were using it to spot our convoys. We spent 3 days on that hill. 3 days of fire and rain. I remember the smell of the burn gel. We used it to clear the brush. It was a thick orange paste that turned the jungle into an oven. It smelled like gasoline and charred steak. We sat in our holes, watching the gel burn. The shadows were in the bunkers below us. We could hear them digging. Scrape, scrape, scrape. They were like moles. They're right under us, Davis had whispered back then. This was before the gully. He was still full of nerves. Let 'em dig, I told him. They're just digging their own graves. But I was wrong. They were digging our graves. When the sun went down, they came out of the ground like ghosts. They didn't use rifles that night. They used knives and strangling wires. It was a silent, terrifying scramble in the dark. I remember the weight of a man on top of me. I couldn't see his face. I just felt his breath, hot and smelling of fermented rice. I felt his hands on my throat. I didn't use my rifle. There wasn't room. I used my trench tool, the folding shovel. I hit him with the sharpened edge. I didn't feel like a soldier. I felt like a butcher. When the sun came up, the hill was ours. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like we had just survived a shipwreck. I looked at my trench tool. It was chipped. I spent 3 hours that afternoon sharpening it with a whetstone. Shirt, shirt, shirt. The sound was hypnotic. It blocked out the sound of the birds. It blocked out the sound of my own thoughts. I still have that trench tool. It's in the garage, under a pile of old tarps. I don't use it for gardening. I can't touch it without feeling the weight of that man on my chest. The story lingers on the sensory details of the camp. The sound of a lifer, career officer, barking orders that didn't make sense in the mud. The way the soldiers would trade sweet sticks from their rations for extra ammo. The way a letter from home would be read and reread until the paper fell apart and the words were just a memory. You don't forget the faces, but you forget the names. They bleed together into a single face. The face of the boy you were, and the faces of the boys who didn't come back. They say time heals all wounds. They're wrong. Time just builds a wall around them. But the wounds are still there behind the bricks, festering in the dark. I sit in the dark now. The rain has stopped. The tin roof is quiet. I reach for my glass of water. My hand is steady. For now. I look out the window. The moon is up. It's a white, clean moon. Not the sickly yellow moon of the Delta. But in the shadows of the trees at the edge of the lawn, I see a movement. Just a flicker. Is it the wind? Is it a deer? Or is it the shadow finally catching up to me? I don't move. I don't breathe. I just lock my sights on the dark. And I wait. Because in the end, that's all a soldier does. He waits. For the order, for the ambush, for the end. I'm still waiting. I'm still locked on the shadow. I'm still in the green. The narrative slowly fades, lingering on the rhythmic breathing of the narrator, the distant sound of a clock ticking, sounding like a distant mortar, and the final heavy realization that the war is never over for those who truly lived it. 9.4 pounds. God, it's heavy.